And I was talking about the seasons of life, and we were talking about all the things that we go through and all the things that occur. Was that that song Louis Armstrong? Is that who performed that? That's what I thought. As I was listening to it, I was thinking of when I met him. I was 17 years old, and I was leaving home, just graduated from high school. And I was at the airport in Knoxville, Tennessee, and Louis Armstrong was there. I was headed to Washington, D.C. for a job for the summer, and so excited, and I was thinking of that person that was getting on that airplane when she met Louis Armstrong. He was so kind and nice. It was just a pleasure to meet him. And if that young 17-year-old had just known then what she knows now about the challenges in life, how to get through them, how to manage them, and how to navigate and move forward and find joy after all. You see, sometimes people can look at some folks and they'll think, oh boy, there's a whole lot of glamour and glitz, and they've never had a painful thing that's ever happened to them. Sometimes you'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised at people that look like nothing challenging has ever happened to them. You'd be surprised at the depth of despair and depression they've been in. And it's why they can talk about it so well. It's why they can give advice to you about how to get through it to the other side. We had a friend here, one of my best friends actually, Rosa, that had dealt with depression all of her life, her young life. She never had found a way to get above it. It didn't matter the medication, it didn't last long. It didn't matter what she did, she couldn't change her thoughts. I talked with her so many times. I remember talking and encouraging her, but the best thing you could do was just to be with her and listen. That was the thing you could do, was just to listen. And what I noticed about her and others that I have been with, both family and friends that have a deep depression that they don't seem to be able to get beyond, is that there's a light that goes out. I don't know what you call it, but the person has forgotten how to connect with that divine inner light. And the light, actually, it's still there. They just can't remember how to connect with it. And something fascinating that happens is that if you will look in the eyes of a person that's in depression and despair, you will see that the light is not there. They may have normally bright blue eyes. At that time, their eyes are a dull gray. And it's just exactly like someone has turned the light out. And what happens is that they can't, or they haven't found a way, they haven't found a way to change those thoughts. They haven't found a way to break that thought pattern. You can. But it takes a whole lot of practice before you see that glimmer at the end of a tunnel. I was reading an article in Unity magazine by a woman who's a Unity minister, and her young son committed suicide. He'd had a normal youth, and then during college, they just didn't know what happened. But something clicked on, and he started being depressed and absolutely couldn't get out of it. And he did take his life, and then she and her husband spent the next 2 or 3 years just trying to move on. And she said that the thing that kept holding them back was guilt. That they felt so much guilt over what could I have done? What should I have done to make it different? And when they both finally realized there wasn't anything else they could have done or should have done, they finally began to get over it and see that he lived perhaps the life he was meant to live. Maybe he was only destined to be on the earth a certain number of years. So they changed the way they looked at it from injuring themselves by beating themselves up all the time into looking at the joyful moments they had with him. They started thinking about when he was a baby and how loving he was, and then as a youth, as he played sports and all the different things, and they started being so grateful for having had him in their lives. And then they've made this as a ministry, and they've begun to see it differently. Time often will do that for you. You can see down the road. You'll see things from a higher perspective that you couldn't see close up at the moment. But down the road, they were able to see they were going to use this situation to help so many other parents and family members that were in this valley of despair and didn't know how to get out. In the bulletin this morning, we have a couple of quotes from Byron Katie. I don't know how many of you are familiar with her. She's pretty well known for the books that she's written about. She calls it The Work. And the reason she wrote this is because she had spent a great deal of her adult life in depression and despair and had no way forward. And then all of a sudden it came to her, the reason that she wasn't able to get beyond it was she didn't seem to be able to change these spiraling thoughts, just these patterns and cycles of continual negative thoughts. And realized if she could just change her thought, just one, maybe she could change the next one. Maybe she could make it more positive. But she said she came to this realization. When you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. What does that mean for you? If something has happened, you can't go back. There is no if only I had done this. It's not going to help. The only thing you can do is to go forward. I remember a woman that we knew of when we lived in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and they were seniors, and she had been ironing and forgotten, left the iron on. Well, that usually would be no problem, but there was something wrong with the electrical cord, and it caught fire. And in this chaos, her husband had a heart attack and died. So she spent the next 2 years in her own enforced hell. She placed herself in a jail cell, metaphorically, and wouldn't let herself out because she kept saying, "This is my fault, this is my fault, this is my fault," until a friend kindly and gently led her to know, this is not your fault. He would have had that heart attack tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. So would you please quit blaming yourself and the woulda, shoulda, couldas, the if-onlys. We have got to let those go. We were meant to be joyful. We were meant to have joy. We were meant to get over all of the things that have come our way and the challenges. We were meant to get over those and become joyful after all. I know sometimes people get stuck in a rut. They feel like they're the only person in the world that has this issue, or they can't make a right decision. Couldn't make a right decision if they had to. But the truth is they can. And the sooner they get out of that pattern of thinking, the better their lives will be. You see, we've come to know that there are neural pathways in the brain. And the more you think a certain thought, whatever it is, you know what's happening? You're making a rut in your brain. Now, what would you rather have? Something positive or negative there? And what happens? The brain is very creative. It makes a shortcut to that rut, see? So you don't even have to think it as deeply anymore. You can get that negative thought pretty quickly. That's the way our brains work. I remember in the year-long study with Unity, the Jaffalas wrote a book called The Quest, and it's a study book for a year. And you can use it as a group or personally. Use it for a year and a topic each week. And I remember them describing the ruts and how they described it. You're in Alaska and you're on a snowy road and it just continues to snow. And you get into your favorite rut and you stay there. And pretty soon you can't get out of it. I remember the way they were describing that and how impossible it can seem to get out of that negative rut. But the truth is you can. An acquaintance posted on Facebook a couple of months ago that she had racing thoughts and she didn't know how to change them. And racing negative thoughts, and she didn't know how to change them. And I didn't comment on the post, but I did send her a message personally. And I said, you know, you can change those thoughts, but it does take practice and dedication. And you can, just a little bit at a time, you can change that thought. It comes in, and you just gently and lovingly shove it away. Another negative thought comes in, gently and lovingly push it away. If that doesn't work, you can use a 2x4. But you can. So I know last week I was telling some stories, and one of them was the woman. Now, this was written many years ago, and I'll just give you a summary of it if you weren't here. And the title of the little essay is called Landing in Holland, and that'll tell you how long ago this was written, because we all know that that's called the Netherlands now. And the Netherlands is a beautiful, beautiful place. It's just not where she thought she was going. And she was pregnant at a time when we were pregnant then, we didn't know the gender of our child. We didn't know if they would be born with a disability. We didn't know any of those things. We found out when the child was born. And at that time, too, disabilities were sometimes looked at differently. And a child with Down syndrome, they didn't necessarily know that they could learn and grow and live as vital and joyful life as we do. They just didn't realize that. So the essay went that she she was using the metaphor of landing, expecting to land in Italy. And you're going to go to all the beautiful places, and Venice and Florence and Rome, and you're going to do all these beautiful things, and then that's what you're expecting. And then you wake up after the long flight and they say, "Welcome to Holland." And she was just saying about how for some time, it took some time to adjust to it. And then when you've been there for a while, you notice the beauty there in Holland. The flowers, and the tulips, and the mountains, and the Rembrandts, and just so much there. And you don't miss Italy at all. As a matter of fact, you're so glad you landed there and you didn't land in Italy. And that's the way it is with many of our challenges in this life. We wouldn't have wanted it. There is no way we would have chosen this dis-ease, this loss of a loved one, this divorce, this family member leaving us, this death, this challenge, this whatever it is. We didn't want it. We never, ever, ever would have chosen that. But somehow we've lived through it. We come out on the other side, and down the road, just like the Unity minister that lost her son, we see there was a purpose in this. And we see that we can use those gifts to share our love with others. It's always the way of it. There's always a gift if you'll stay with it long enough. If you'll hang in there, there's always a gift to come. And back to Byron Katie. She said that one of the greatest things that you can remember when coming out of a difficult time is that there is always something you can learn from it. You can grow from it. You should never argue with reality because it did happen. So depressed. She never got over it. She took her life. When the pandemic started, and each of us that had been her friends, we'd been a support group for her. We'd been there and wanted to continue. But once the shutdown happened, we could not do that anymore. And I think she just decided she couldn't. She was at her depth. She couldn't live with it anymore. And especially knowing that she couldn't get out, couldn't go anywhere. And she didn't reach out to any of us. As a matter of fact, we were supposed to have a prayer call that Tuesday morning. And last text I got from her, she told me she wouldn't be on the call. And it was very touching for those of us that loved her. When she was up, she was the most joyful person you've ever seen. She rode a motorcycle. I mean, this woman was cool. But you know what? That loss isn't in vain either, because each of us learned a lot from her. We learned a lot about depression and people that think they can't get over it. We've learned how to counsel people more effectively, to be there for them, because sometimes all someone else needs is someone to call them and pray for them. I ran into a man in a small grocery when we still lived in East Tennessee. He was an older man, and he was crying. Every few steps he'd take, he'd just be sobbing. And I went up to him, and I took his hands, and I said, "I imagine you've had a deep loss, haven't you?" He said he had. I said, "Would you mind if I pray with you?" So right there in the grocery, I prayed with this man, and his sobbing stopped. He said, "That's exactly what I needed. I needed somebody to listen and to know they cared." I used to have a friend when we lived there too that was going through a terrible loss. Oh, her partner had left her, and she did not think she could make it another moment, much less another hour or another day, were the depths of her despair. And she would call, and she would just, all she'd say is, "Would you pray for me?" And we'd pray, and her spirits would be lifted. She'd say, "Thank you, I can make it through the rest of the day." We know that prayer works. We know that a listening ear works. I've also included a few things here in the bulletin about overcoming grief and or undesired, unexpected change. And it happens in all of our lives. It happens in all of our lives. It doesn't matter who we are. It occurs. Find a friend to talk to, perhaps a support group. Let it out. Talk it out. Don't store it up. Do not store up those emotions. They will kill you. There are deadly emotions, and some of them are anxiety, worry, pain, and grief. If that 17-year-old that I were when I got on that airplane going to Washington, D.C., if I had known how to control anxiety early in life, oh boy, I would have thought I had found a miracle. I didn't know it existed. But you can. In the middle of anything. I don't care what it is. You can take a deep breath. You can remember who you are, and you can remember who's walking right along beside you. And it can be either of Charles's friends that he mentioned earlier. That Buddha, Krishna, Jesus dude, any of them that he was talking about. Those that came to bring light to the planet. That's why they were here, you know. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., St. Francis. Let me be an instrument of peace and love and joy. But you can stop right in the middle of whatever it is that you're going through, whatever trauma, crisis. You can take a deep breath and remember who you are and allow the light to come in. The Quakers call it the inner light. We call it the inner light. You're connected to the light, whatever you want to call it. And allow that to hold you, comfort you, give you peace. And we have the beautiful words from the psalmist who said, "Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning." What does that mean? Are they meaning the absolute night and morning? No, it's the appropriate amount of time that it takes to get to the morning. And that is determined by what you've gone through. In the other words, he makes me lie down in green pastures. Oh, that beautiful. Leads me beside the still waters. restores my soul. Wow, beautiful words. And then more wise words from an old farmer who said, weeds grow in fertile soil. You got to pull them up by the roots to get rid of them. What does that mean? To get to the roots of your deeper, most troubled thoughts, you've got to get down to the roots of your belief system and what created those thoughts. Do I believe there's a loving power in the universe that has my back at all times? Yes, I believe. Do I believe that I have the power to overcome this situation? Yes, indeed. I'm an overcomer, and I want you to know it. And I'm here as living proof. I just hope and pray that you and all your loved ones will have a blessed, beautiful, joyful week and the rest of this holy season and the rest of your lives. Thank you for your time.